Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an unboxing of Aces of Valor, the World War I solitaire aerial combat game designed by the appropriately named Erik von Rossing and published by Legion Wargames. Now the heart of this game is its campaign game. It's either 8, 12, or 16 missions long, and you control an entire squadron of either French, British, American, or German fighters over the Western Front in World War I. Wide variety of missions, skills, and pilots that level up, technology that advances as the game goes on. There's a lot to look at. Let's jump in and take a look at the components and offer some impressions on gameplay. As we start to take a look at this, another disclaimer, this is a game I'm very inclined to like because I feel like it's right in my wheelhouse. Solitaire game where you've got a dynamic campaign, your pilots are going to skill up. And again, this is a game where you control an entire squadron of 8 fighters, so it's not a campaign where you're controlling an individual pilot, but rather you're in charge of the whole squadron. But dynamic campaign, you can play a mission in about a half an hour, you can move on, you come back, and the impact of that mission has a big impact on what happens in subsequent missions, and you're trying to win an entire long campaign game. I love games like this, so I'm super excited to dig into this one. Let's get started though and take a look at just some general parameters on the back of the box here. First up, of course, number of players is 1. Solitaire suitability is high. So this again is a single player game. You're going to be playing this one by yourself. Game complexity is a medium. I'm going to give it an estimate probably of a 4 out of 10 in terms of complexity. A lot of it's a procedural game where you're going to have kind of pre-mission, during mission, then there might be a combat sequence, and then a post-mission type of thing. So kind of a lather, rinse, repeat with a lot of variety and kind of development as your campaign and your squadron progresses. So in terms of game scale, each counter represents 1 aircraft and crew. You got map scale is about 5 to 10 miles per square. The turns are about 5 to 10 minutes per turn, and then it takes about 30 minutes to play a mission. So doing the math on that, if the campaigns are 8, 12, or 16 missions long, you've got either a 4, 6, or 8-hour campaign to take this game all the way from its start to the end of the campaign. So let's jump in now and take a look at what's inside the box. There's about a little bit, I think a little bit under a 2-inch box, close to 1.5 inches or so, and there's a good bit of stuff in here. We've got our baggies, always nice, so we have counters, and 4 blue 6-sided dice, and another separate big baggie. Let's take a look at the rules to start off. This is a 20-page rule book, although the last one here just lists the highest ranking aces from World War I from each of the 4 nationalities in the game. And again, you can play as either German, French, British, or US. You can charge squads. So of course, you can play multiple times, but when you play, you're in charge of 1 nationality as you play. So 20 pages, the back page here is designer notes, and then we have a 3-page example of play. So really our rules, and we count the cover, go to 50, go to page 15 minus 1, so about 14 pages of rules. And the way the rules work, they're very sequential. It kind of goes through and it talks about setting up your campaign, then it's going to talk about the pre-mission phase, and it's going to refer you to a lot of the player aids. There isn't a booklet of tables or charts or things that you're going to follow through. Everything's kind of laid out on these player aids, so it's going to say do this on chart 5, and you go there and you do that type of thing. So the rules very much have you moving back and forth between the rule book and the player aids. Quite a bit of text here. 2 columns. Text is nice and pretty easy to read. Some colors scattered in here with some helpful. Occasionally you've got some graphics in here to kind of guide you through things and kind of help you through it, especially in the example of play back here. But looks fairly straightforward in terms of execution. Hard to tell until we start to dig into the game, of course, but I'm optimistic that the learning will go pretty smoothly. Now, there are cards that are brought into play. There are 3 different types of cards, 3 different decks, if you would. Optional rules, which is a smaller one that lists some of the different optional rules you can bring into play. So again, kind of getting at that depth element. You know, usually a game like this, you might play a campaign. You probably want to come back and do one with each nationality. So I would suspect there's a lot of depth into this game in terms of different ways to play it. So ammunition limits, Entente fighters carrying bombs, breaking off not automatic. So some different ways to modify the game, so you can pull them out here on these cards here as you're going through and playing subsequent versions. Now, there are post-mission events. So we can pull the mission events off. These look pretty cool. It's kind of all kinds of different things that you really can't predict that are going to happen. So senior pilot is reassigned. So one of your experienced leaves the squadron to command his own unit. So you got different kinds of things that can happen here. Large enemy bomber spotted. So rare chance to intercept. So this looks like an extra mission that happens here that you're going to be kind of called into. I noticed there was one, Aces of Valor. An elite enemy pilot challenges your squadron to a personal duel over no man's land. You can decline it and lose a victory point. If you accept, then it tells you what to do. So in between missions, it actually looks like there could be some kind of minor missions or other events here that basically impact what happens to your squadron, and potentially some other kind of minor missions that could be executed. So really fun idea. Looks like there's 3, 4, maybe about 20 of these or so, maybe a little less, 16 to 20 of those that can kind of generate a little bit of color and increase narrative to the campaign. Fun idea. I like the way it looks like it's executed, so that's cool to see. The bulk, however, of the cards here are these mission cards. I'll show close-ups as we go through these. So these are all of the different types of missions that you can kind of draw before you go out and do these. So we got photo recon, defensive patrol, artillery spotting, trench strafing, balloon busting, ground support. And I think there's probably, I'm going to say 8 to 10 different types. And there are multiple cards of the same one, but they might take you to different sectors and have other nuances. So how many fighters can go and where you have to go and things like that. So 2 different defensive patrol ones, but slightly different kind of execution there. 6 fighters. So it doesn't, looks like some of these missions you don't take your whole squadron with you. So you're going to pick 3 fighters and 1 2-seater here. So 4 fighters, 2 bombers. And there are 4 different types of aircraft. In addition to the fighters, there's 3 other types. 2 bombers. There's bombers, single-seaters, I think like for spotting and stuff like that. I might get that a little bit off, but it's not, you're in charge of the fighters, but there are other fighters and counters represented in the game. So lots of different variety in the types of missions that you can draw for your campaign. Now let's take a look at the counters. There are 2.5 counter sheets. This first one here, as we look at it, has the mission objectives. So this would be artillery battery, tank, town, entrenched infantry, balloons, trains, convoys, so different targets that you're going to, and then some of the markers that you're going to be dropping on your planes and adding to gameplay to basically help control and monitor gameplay. And there are 2 sides to them. There is a weakened state of the target, so it's full strength or reduced strength, and then more markers here to kind of help you manage and control gameplay. All right, so we take a look at that. Now there are 2 counter sheets here for the aircraft, and the tan or the brown ones here are British, green are US, so we're looking at the British and US fighters here. It looks like each nationality has 3 different types of aircraft, and I think they're tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So we can see here, like for example, the US has the N-17, then an N-28, which is a little bit higher. So it's got a 7.5 instead of a 6.5, and then the S-13 here, which is a tier 3 type of aircraft. I'm not quite sure how these are deployed in gameplay, whether you always start with the lowest tier and then work your way up, but it does look like there are options to upgrade your aircraft as you go along. I'm not quite sure how you determine your initial squadron as you go off here. Each pilot is named and they have different skills. So we have Eddie von Rickenbacker, Eddie Rickenbacker, I think was the top US one. That's him with a 2-2. So I think you can get to different levels with these planes and different pilots as they go through. I'm not quite sure how the leveling works up, but there are different skill abilities for each level of pilot. Then the planes do have a reduced state if you take damage. So it's a relatively, I think this is a game that's going to play relatively quickly, that has an emphasis on gameplay. And of course, it's a war game, so there's a lot of depth to it, but it doesn't get so far into the weeds that a mission is going to take 2 or 3 hours to kind of execute. So here we have the German in red with the red numbers, and then this is the French in the blue numbers here. And again, 3 different tiers of aircraft. I'll show some close-ups on these too. And then each pilot individually named with different skills as you're going through them. And I'm not sure how the skills work, whether all your pilots start at the same skill level or when you draw them at the beginning of the game. So those things I haven't quite figured out yet, but there is definitely a skill development part of the game for your pilots as well. Again, printed on both sides, looks very cool. These are 3/4 of an inch, I think, wide, and then the marker ones, I think, are 5/8, so they all look relatively large and easy to handle. Now let's take a look at our player aids, and there are 4 of them, and I think they go for each different phase of the game. So this is the player aid that guides you through the setup for the campaign, the different things that you're going to be doing and need to do to kind of get the campaign going, as well as having the aircraft key and the ground target key and things like that, a map key. So other basic information about the game. That is single-sided, so that one is there. And then pre-mission phase and post-mission phase. So this gameplay aid helps you work through. And again, as you're following the rules, it's referring you to the different charts to kind of understand how to use them. So the support for the charts is in the rules. So the pre-mission execution, post-mission execution, that gameplay aid helps with that. Then the flight phase and the combat phase are broken apart into two things. And as we look at the kind of the gameplay management map, if you would, we'll take a look at how those are impacted. But you're not always going to run into combat, into big dogfights. But if you do, this is the player aid that helps you manage that. In this one here, if we open it up, 11 by 17, single-sided cardstock, again, is the one for the flight phase. So all of the different things that can happen. Random ground target, anti-aircraft ground fire, difficult landing at airfield, forced landing, damage aircraft check, damage aircraft revolt, flight event outcome. So lots of different things that can happen in the course of the flight to and back from the targets. And that player aid handles that one. The combat system looks really interesting. It's not done on a map, it's done kind of initiative based, and we'll take a look at that because I think the player aid, not the player aid, but the chart basically on the game board itself will help do that. But this is basically the combat phase execution player aid. So all of the different charts that you need in order to be able to help execute combat while you're in the air. So there we go with the player aids. Now let's take a look at our last thing here, which is the 34-inch by 22-inch kind of game management system, if you would. Now this does have a map on it, and I'll show a close-up of that as we go through. But this is basically, this course won't fit on the screen. I'll show pieces of it as I'm talking about it. But this has basically all of the places where you're going to be putting cards, how you're going to handle combat, how you're going to handle the movement, victory point track, campaign mission track, and all these kinds of things here. But what we're looking at now, and I'll show a close-up of this too, this actually is the campaign map. So this is the place where your squadron's going to be flying. You might start, you'll have a home base marker here somewhere, and you're going to be asked to fly to a certain zone to execute a mission and then fly back. So this is kind of that campaign scale map, and you're going to be moving your squadron around here trying to do different things on that. But then on the other side of this here, and I'll see if I can fold this over and show this too, this is the operations chart, and this is where the combat happens. Now, I'm not 100% sure on how this works, but this is what's called the initiative track, and the way it looked like from kind of a scanning of the rules is, as combat starts, you're going to have a die roll modifier that's going to influence, but you're going to determine which aircraft in each of the enemy squadrons and your squadrons has the higher initiative. And then they get to execute an action, and I think it's on an aircraft that has a lower initiative. And so you're going to start from your higher execution aircraft and work your way down through your lower execution aircraft, and that's going to spawn all sorts of actions. Some aircraft are going to be destroyed and dropped here. Some are going to break off. Once an aircraft has taken an action, it goes into this box. Then we have lost, recovery, ready, and the current flight. So this is kind of, I think, where a lot of the combat in the game happens, and it's based on not necessarily where you're looking at range and different flight situations, but it's a simplified system that's based on pilot initiative and their skills that's going to determine it. So it looks like a really neat system that's going to be fast to play, because you can imagine, you know, if you lined up 16 or 12 aircraft or something like that and played that out, a simple combat encounter like that could probably be a 2-hour game to itself, and then you're talking about a campaign game that is really, really long. So I think one of the key elements of this type of game is having the right level of detail that keeps things moving, and the right level of detail that feels like there's a lot of engagement and player agency and things to decide on. So that's really the magic sweet spot, I think, in these games. And this is an interesting take on that. So I'm really excited. I'm kind of very, very curious to see how it plays out and how it feels as you play it. At a glance, it looks really interesting. It looks cool. I've not seen something done like this before, so I'm very excited to give it a try. The other things I think on the player aid here are more kind of basically understandable. We've got a victory point track, campaign mission track, campaign costs, and various little pieces of information there that can help you as you're managing your campaign. And that brings us to the end of the box. So a nice little package and system for executing a squadron level solitaire game of World War I aerial combat in the Western Front. Very excited to give this one a try. I do want to bring a mission or two to the channel as soon as I can. There are a number of games I'm going to be playing going forward, so I'm not quite sure when it'll happen, but I am very excited to give this one a try. Thanks so much for watching. I'll put a link to a couple of other videos we've made on similar games if you'd like to take a look at those, but I'd love to hear your comments, thoughts, ideas. If you've got the game, how are you enjoying it? I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and have a great day.